In March of 2023, our CEO wrote a memo to our team, and he called it AI Code Red. The company's first ever Code Red. It was literally and figuratively kind of alarming. Waves can do two things, right? You can ride the wave to greater success as an organization, or the wave can crush you.
AutoSkills helps teams go from AI curious to AI ready. We run tailored workshops to uncover where AI has the biggest impact in your business, whether that's automating repetitive tasks, cutting hours out of your daily workflows, or choosing the right mix of tools and custom solutions. It's practical, hands on, and built to get your team using AI for work that matters. Book your free 30-minute AI readiness audit at autoskills.ai. Most companies think about AI as a technology problem. Brandon Sammut sees it as a people problem. As Chief People Officer at Zapier, he's been wrestling with a question every business is about to face. How do you bring AI into your team without breaking trust, culture, or momentum? Brandon has seen the fears firsthand. HR is often the last place leaders want to experiment, but also the first place employees turn when change feels threatening. That tension has shaped how he approaches AI adoption inside Zapier, and what he believes other companies will have to get right. In our conversation, he shares anxieties he hears from employees, the practices that actually help people lean into AI, and the lessons leaders can use to make their organizations AI ready. You'll hear how to address fear head-on, how to retrain teams for new workflows, and what culture signals tell you whether adoption is sticking. Listen to the full episode for concrete strategies you can take back to your own team. How to build trust while introducing new tools, how to design processes people want to use, and how to turn AI from an unknown risk into a shared advantage. If you enjoyed the conversation, make sure to subscribe or follow the podcast so you don't miss future episodes with leaders building the human side of AI adoption. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hey, Brandon, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be here, Haroon.
Do you mind starting off with a quick introduction?
I'm Brandon Sammut. I am the Chief People Officer at Zapier, which is an AI orchestration platform. Makes it easy to connect the tools and LLMs that you already know and love to get a ton of work done using automation and AI. And of course, here at Zapier, leading our people team, I get to see firsthand a variety of ways to do that for talent and HR use cases. Other than that, I grew up near Detroit. I come from a family of auto workers. So I've always been really interested in, how you build things and, build entire economies and communities around just, important work that does good in the world.
So you have a pattern of being in the center of automation, both in the auto industry and now what's happening across tech, which is super cool. I did not know that.
That's a good way to think about it.
All right. So before we get tactical, Brandon, there's a lot I want to cover with you, but upskilling 700 employees across dozens of countries is no easy matter. And so before we get too in the weeds, can you give me a 2-minute story of how Zapier's AI transformation began? What was a moment that the company decided that this was an all-company priority and it was going to go all in on making sure that AI literacy was as high as possible?
The triggering event for Zapier was the release of ChatGPT 3.5 in the fall of 2022. By the time we got into the spring of 2023, about 2.25 years ago, we had been using 3.5 enough to know that it was going to meaningfully influence how we achieve our mission, which is to make automation work for everyone. And one of the first use cases for, an LLM like 3.5 that we were seeing is that it could use API documentation to help build APIs. That was really important for an organization like Zapier. Folks come to Zapier to connect all of their organization's applications and then automate work across them. And APIs are the primary conduit for doing that. And here was a new way to massively scale the rate of API building and maintaining too. And so that was really interesting for us. And so in March of 2023, Wade, our CEO, wrote a memo to our team, and he called it AI Code Red. The company's first ever Code Red. It was literally and figuratively kind of alarming. And it was meant to be that way because what we were seeing in March of 2023, and now I think so many of us are seeing the same thing, was a wave right? A huge wave of innovation, of opportunity. But the other thing, and I really admire how I think transparent Wade was about this, waves can do two things, right? You can ride the wave to greater success as an organization, or the wave can crush you. And that's kind of exactly what we were seeing and thinking back in early 2023. And so the AI Code Red memo was really a call in, it was an invitation in, all in together as a company to start really building and puzzling with even more intention that we had been doing in the prior 6 months to really understand how to scale our mission and how to scale this company with AI. Now, happy to talk more about this, but I will leave you with the teaser that, we published this early enough in like the LLM, wave. That memo or that call to action was not universally popular at Zapier.
Okay, a lot to unpack there. And the first thing that comes to mind is code red. I mean, it sounds alarming almost, and it seems like that was somewhat intentional. Do you think that's an important part of getting an entire organization, especially one that's the size of Zapier's, which, correct me if I'm wrong, 700 plus employees, for getting an organization of that size to mobilize in unison? Is that a key part of just getting that message across, is making the message strong?
Short answer is yes. I think so. Especially when we're calling the team into an area we have not been before, right? It's uncharted territory. And the other thing is it's really important. So it's new, it's relatively ambiguous, it's a little intimidating and scary, and it's really important for us to figure this out. So you take all of those ingredients together, and what I have learned in every organization I have led is however clear we think we are being as leaders, be 2 ticks clearer than that. Because to your point, Zapier at 750 people, in one sense, that's a big organization. In another sense, it's not a big organization, right? We have customers who have 8,000, 12,000, 20,000 employees. Those are big organizations. But I would say, to your point, like you start getting into even just 100, 200, 300 people, and the amount of clarity and focus that leaders need to help provide to the team becomes really meaningful. It being, again, almost painfully clear and repetitive, I think really helps. And I'd say all the more so when the team is distributed like so many of our organizations.
And what was the internal reaction to this code red?
It was mixed at first. We had folks that had already been using LLMs every day who understood exactly what Wade and our leadership team were pointing towards and were encouraged by the clarity and the focus. We had folks in the middle, and then we had folks who were at least initially kind of like, I don't know, like this is literally alarmist. Like, what's going on over here? Like, I don't yet see what you're pointing at. And I also, because this is so new for all of us, not just at Zapier, I'm not exactly sure what to do yet. How is this going to influence my work? How is this going to influence my job? We had some folks that, again, like Zapier is a pretty open culture, ask like, will I still have a job? And the list goes on and on. And so I think I would grade an organization's initial call to action on AI and the response of the team, not by whether everyone has consensus or everyone's immediately supportive, but rather like the real culture test is, do people have enough like psychological safety, to ask questions and share concerns? Because with a lot of these like transformations, it's the rate of learning that really matters, not whether, you have all the initial answers or where the entire team is initially on board.
Yeah. And I imagine that's a really delicate balance and sharing this call to arms, so to speak. And we've seen a few other leaders follow that playbook recently. I think Toby at Shopify, I think the CEO at Fiverr had done something similar as well. Those are a couple of notable public examples, but sharing the magnitude of the shift that's happening and then balancing that with the psychological safety, as you hint at. And what are some tactics that you might employ in order to strike that balance in a way that is ultimately productive for the organization and not necessarily creating more anxiety and fear?
There are a couple things. One, a lot of the rubber hits the road on these big calls to action in team specific settings. So what that code red ultimately meant for engineering team practically looked a bit different than it did for our marketing team. And so like what Toby did at Shopify, what we did here at Zapier, that's really important as that kind of tip of the iceberg call to action or invitation in for the team. but it's just the tip of the iceberg. Specific tactics that you can scaffold off of that really help. Do some team specific ask me anythings. Hey, we heard this from Wade. We're all figuring out together what this means. And actually on our team, we get to hold the pen and write part of that story ourselves. And so that's a place where re-anchoring the team on the usually pretty meaningful degree of agency we have. Sometimes we can get really stressed out by all the additional ambiguity and responsibility that comes with being called into something new. But in so many of our organizations, the other side of that new responsibility or ambiguity is opportunity and agency. And in fact, organizations, if you're Wade or anyone on our leadership team, we're counting on our teams to hold the pen and write some of the story, as part of the broader company. So team specific ask me anything is really helpful. The other thing, there's some very simple company wide ingredients that we've seen be very helpful for making a kind of big, scary, ambitious call to action really practical, really quickly. And some examples of that would be, and this first one's going to be not intuitive potentially, but the company's AI use guidelines. You look at that and it's really, that's the big inspiration that helps a team get its head and arms around a big AI call to action. In practice, both at Zapier and in so many of our customers' organizations, the answer is yes. AI use guidelines can be a really helpful ingredient because great AI use guidelines don't constrain people's thinking. They provide clarity on golden paths. What tools can we use at our organization at this time? What data, customer data, employee data, can I feed into these systems and why? And that clarity, with a lot of the research on this topic, you provide the boundaries of that sandbox to build within. And it actually boosts the team's creativity. It's actually the total absence of clarity or guidelines that can constrain the team's creativity because we appreciate the power of AI and also the risks associated with it. And so in the absence of guardrails or guidance, teams will be pretty hesitant to start building. And we really wanted folks to get hands-on as quickly as possible. So AI use guidelines were a great company-specific action. And we did that within a week and a half of that code red.
Roughly, if you had to break down when the initial code red was shared across your employees, what was the rough breakdown? If you had to put a number on it, how much of the response was fearful and anxious versus excited, optimistic, and maybe, more of a positive response in that sense?
I'd be hard pressed to break the ratio down person by person, but for a reason that I think is really instructive, which is, I think for most of us, we were all feeling a mix of those sentiments. I can speak for myself, for example, March of 2023, when that code red comes out, I am excited. I see an opportunity. I'm also nervous because that same opportunity can also be a threat for so many of our organizations. We have to turn it into an opportunity. And so it just introduces a whole other layer of uncertainty on the business. And then practically speaking, I knew that I would also have to help my team hold the pen and write our page in the story of Zapier's AI transformation. I wasn't exactly sure what that was going to involve. I didn't know what I didn't know yet. And as a leader, that can be a little stressful.
Yeah. So individually, everyone's feeling these mix of emotions. And as leaders, it's important to try and get folks leaning more towards those positive emotions, those feelings of optimism and excitement. And you described some of the tactics that you use there. And who were some of the leaders who were involved in this transformation process? So you're the chief people officer, and I'm curious to learn why it's important for the people function to be central in leading this transformation, and what some of the other functions are that you would suggest should be involved in this process as well.
I draw a lot of inspiration from what we've learned at Zapier, honestly, over the last 2.5 years. And I really admire how Wade, our CEO, approached this, which said, hey, this is existential for our organization. And ideally, it's going to be a source of rocket fuel for the organization, for the customer. And that's great. At the end of the day, if you asked who's accountable for Zapier's AI transformation, Wade would say it's himself, right? Just like it is any massive thing that we're trying to do as an organization. Importantly, Wade holds each of his execs accountable for answering to their recipe for their organization. So as it relates to how we build, maintain, and improve our products, Wade is looking at Chi, our CPTO. He's looking at Moshtaba, our head of engineering. He's looking at Gio, our head of product, and saying, hey, tell me the recipe. And by the way, if there are pieces of infrastructure that are missing, or if you just have questions, let's talk about that. But at the end of the day, like just like anything else related to the company's product development engine, look into the same three leaders for a point of view on how AI can influence how we do this. Same thing goes for everything related to talent and HR, where he's looking to me to answer to how AI can meaningfully improve how we do that work. He's looking to Lauren, our customer support exec, for everything related to support and so on. Now, within all of that, and to your point, the people team plays a really important role in creating a lot of the enabling ingredients for individual teams to make good progress and produce results with AI, just like with any other organizational transformation. And that includes, for example, making sure that we're helping teams form a point of view on the extent to which they have like the skills and the capabilities that are needed to kind of cook their recipe.
I like this language of recipe and having the leaders share their recipe for their respective functions and being held responsible for those. Now, if we're thinking about that recipe and the byproduct of that recipe as being AI transformation within that specific function, what are some of the key ingredients that Wade is taking a look at in order to assess the, I guess, feasibility and rigor for that specific recipe for that specific function?
You know, at the end of the day, AI is a tool. It's not an outcome. And I think it's really helpful when we're thinking about AI adoption to reground in that. All of our organizations have missions, products, and customers. We have goals, things we're trying to do in the world. AI might influence the strategy around that, especially if your company has like an AI play that faces the product and the customer. So, you know, absolutely there. When it comes to the company's internal AI transformation, though, like AI it's a medium or a tool to like meaningfully improve our ability to do the things that we already say matter most in the organization. And so the first ingredient is clarity on what excellence looks like and how you measure it. What are our goals? And you know what's so interesting about this, Rena? So many company transformations, like there are certain cultural or operational components that are enabling forces. So to your point about ingredients, so you know, organizations that have a lot of clarity around what great looks like and are able to measure that in a way that people can see my performance against this particular goal or KPI, that's hugely helpful. And so it can be a tailwind or a helper. The opposite is also true. Organizations or pieces of organizations that lack clarity on what excellence looks like or how to goal to it or what have you. You think about like, what do we do with AI? It's like, I don't know, like what matters most and how do you know how you're doing? So again, it sounds fundamental, and I think it is in the literal sense as an ingredient for AI transformation. We talked about psychological safety earlier as a second one. It's incredibly important. It was incredibly important for other transformations that came before it. And the same thing is true with AI now. Folks need to be operating in an environment where they can share a wild, unhinged idea, right? Ask a hard question. Say, I don't know how to do this yet. Can you help? And then last but not least, a third ingredient, I think, is trust and leadership. You know, folks need to be able to trust what their leaders are saying, both where leaders have some confidence or a vision for where the organization needs to go, and also need to trust that management will be open in saying that we don't yet know the answer to something where that's the case, but also be really clear about whether and how we're going to go get that answer.
Love that. That's a great breakdown. And the part that I want to double click into here is measuring excellence. So you mentioned that as being a key ingredient. Makes a ton of sense. And a lot of company leaders who I'm sure listening to this episode, they're going to be wondering, how do I establish a baseline of how literate my organization or function is in terms of their ability to understand the different use cases and workflows that AI can be used to augment or improve the operating leverage of, and establish that baseline so that they can incrementally improve and have a objective metric to measure as they invest in some of these initiatives. How did Zapier start measuring the excellence early on, and how's that evolved over time?
You know, back in spring of 2023, we started measuring one thing in particular very intentionally, and that was both self-reported use of AI to improve our daily work and performance. We added a question to our engagement surveys on exactly that topic. Effectively, like, you know, like I use AI to basically supercharge my work. And it was on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is that definitely is not true for me today, and a 5 was that is absolutely true for me today. And just based on Zapier's mission and what have you, by the time we first measured this in March of 2023, this was like 2 weeks after that AI code red, 75% of the organization already said that the answer to that question for them was yes, that they were using AI, in their core work. However, when we measured it again a few months later, it went down, I think 11 points, I think from 75 to 64. And you might wonder, like, well, what happened there? Like, you in that time you developed your AI use guidelines and provided, got ChatGPT Enterprise and you name it. And and I talked to a bunch of folks about this. And here's what I came to understand. The thing that happened in the intervening 90 days is that we raised the bar for what AI, like fluency or AI adoption, really looked like. We just got a lot clearer as an organization that whereas maybe in March of 2023, we're just like dabbling with prompting and, using it to summarize a basic, thing here or there was enough. By the time we measured again later that summer, I think we got pretty clear that we're talking about like meaningful improvements in everyday performance using AI. And so we saw that dip down to, I think, around 64-ish, and then climbed steadily over the last 2 years. Whereas in April of this year, 89% of folks with this higher bar for what adoption really looks like are saying, you know what, I'm genuinely using AI to boost performance in my core work. So that's one. We also on the back end, like a lot of organizations are paying attention to like actual like product engagement statistics. So daily active users or weekly active users with ChatGPT or some of our other core AI tools would be examples of that. So I'll pause there. That's, I'd say, on the adoption side of the equation. I can definitely talk about how we're thinking about like how to measure impacts now and in the future.
Please. Well, I think maybe a good framing for this is the company-wide AI fluency framework that is being used at Zapier. I know that Lenny Rachitsky in his newsletter had covered this, and I've seen it a few times on LinkedIn over the past couple of weeks as well. I would love to learn more about that fluency framework and dig into that some more.
Yes, that'd be a great way to bring us up to the present, because that's relatively new. It's about 100 days old. So we had been doing all of this upskilling and practice sharing and use case development with AI inside the organization for, again, the better part of 2.5 years now. But about 90 days ago, we started thinking about hiring. And there are definitely like very explicit AI type roles that we were hiring in the organization for a couple of years now. And those had AI relevant interviews and skills tests. And that's excellent. But based on what we were calling ourselves into, it's like, hey, at this point, AI fluency is effectively a baseline expectation for every role in the company. So how can we make sure that we're assessing for that for 100% of folks that we hire? And that's where the inspiration for the AI fluency framework came together. And so I can describe it in a minute, but we use this framework to assess 100% of applicants for 100% of jobs at Zapier. And the framework has 4 tiers. I'll really focus on 3 of the 4 because the kind of quote unquote first tier is literally called unacceptable. Like it is the unacceptable tier because we can't hire folks into the organization who are operating at that level. Now, the good news is that unacceptable tier is largely reserved for folks who just are ideologically or practically opposed to using AI in their daily work. Maybe they have climate concerns, maybe they have ethics concerns that they haven't kind of reconciled or sorted through. And by the way, like I have a lot of empathy for all of that. Like, it's Zapier's ability to achieve its mission and serve its customers. The path to that looking forward, like absolutely involves the use of AI. And again, thoughtful, human-centered use of AI, absolutely. And we don't avoid all of those questions in terms of how we use it and what it's for and what have you. I think it's really important. But we're looking when we hire to bring folks onto the team who want to puzzle through those questions with us together. And so again, but I think being really clear about what our organization is trying to do in the world and why we think that matters, that we are successful, is really helpful. And I think candidates deserve that type of transparency. I think it's at least as important to be clear about who your organization is not for as it is to do like kind of the splashy typical marketing around who you think you're for or why it's great to work here. So that's the unacceptable tier. The other 3 in order are called capable, adaptive, and transformative. Capable would be for folks that are starting to use AI. They're building some degree of how-to fluency, but they haven't necessarily translated the how to into actual impact in their daily work. Like they probably don't have an example yet of how AI is influencing their core kind of productivity or performance. And adaptive is actually exactly a step in that direction. These are folks who do have tangible examples of using AI to improve their productivity and performance in the work as we typically understand it. Transformative. We encounter very few people who operate at this level today, but I think that's what's so helpful. I think a good framework like this or a rubric related to talent, like the top tier or level should be something that's really stretchy, right? Because you want to create a scale where like those like that true excellence can pop in a way that you know it exactly when you see it. And so we reserve transformational for folks who have examples of reimagining the core work itself with AI at the core, really from the ground up. And again, very few people have examples of that because very few organizations have examples of that yet. But that's what we're playing for. And we want to be able to kind of see that excellence in that those skills when we see them.
How do you describe the transformative candidate? It totally makes sense that the bar here is high because you also want to set a standard for folks that is not necessarily commonplace. But can you maybe describe what a transformative candidate that comes through your pipeline might look like and the behaviors and characteristics of them?
Yes, it's a pretty comprehensive package of skills, and it's and they're not all obvious. So let me start with the obvious. The obvious would be folks who are like fairly skillful builders with AI. They can take a vision for a meaningfully different way and more effective way of getting a certain job done, whether it's product development or sales development or recruiting, whatever the case may be, and build those new workflows, build those new ways of working with AI at the core. And again, that's really important. And I think it's the most obvious skill set that comes to mind when folks are thinking about transformative level impact. That's only one half of the coin though, because the other half of the coin, and we see this as really an understated, but equally important ingredient for folks that really change the game with AI, is what I would call craft or taste. And what I mean by that are folks who deeply understand what greatness looks like in that area. Again, think about product development, sales development, recruiting, and so on, who really understand the end user because they've spent a lot of time with them. They have enough experience to understand like the trade-off, at least the traditional trade-offs, right? Whether that's speed versus cost versus quality, or there's the classic, like, you can have two, but not three, pick two, right? It's like, well, with AI, I'm not convinced that we still have to just pick two. Maybe we can have all three, so they have this experience with the end user, some of these core frameworks for understanding what excellence could look like. They understand the traditional barriers to excellence, and they're able to use that to reimagine the core work. For some folks, you think about, well, does that knowledge like constrain you because you're like trapped in the old ways of thinking? And I'm like, well, no, not for someone that's operating at this level. They are aware of traditional ways of working, but they are not constrained by them. So you think about AI builder skills as one set of capabilities. You can think about the second as craft and taste, like really understanding what excellence looks like. And there's a third piece, which is leadership. It's, can this individual migrate not just systems and processes, but people, right? From older ways of working to newer ways of working. So those are really the three core capabilities that I would think about, just to sum it up again. AI builder skills, kind of subject matter expertise or craft. And then the third is just change leadership.
So one of the conceptions that I imagine a lot of the folks in the audience and might be listening to this might have in mind is that somebody needs to be quite technical in order to be a transformative candidate. Is that true? Do they need to be competent with building AI workflows in code, or is that not necessarily a prerequisite here? And are there ways for folks who are quote unquote non-technical to be the transformative candidates? And if so, what does that look like?
Arun, you're hitting on what I think is like one of the most like exciting things about AI, because my answer to your question, does someone need to be technical to be transformative, is no. At least in the way we traditionally think about like a technical individual in software. I think you named one of those traditional characteristics. Like a technical person is someone who can code, can write software. Like that's what it means to be technical in software. The truth of the matter is, well, a couple of things. One, I deeply respect the craft of software development. And I believe, what I hear from some of our engineers that you can vibe code your way to like maybe 80% of a fully baked software solution. But that other 20% is the difference between something that like makes for a good demo and something that is like sustainable, scalable, and really impactful from the customer's perspective. So call that maybe like the last mile in software development. And I can still see, at least today, that, software developers and PMs and like that domain expertise around software development is still incredibly important. So we keep humans very much in the loop in the work that we do at Zapier. However, there have never been more tools and ways of working where folks who do not know how to code can build solutions using their subject matter expertise, their craft, their understanding of the customer to really move the ball forward on performance and productivity. And I can, think of no better example from Zapier's recent history than our own customer support team. We do a quarterly hackathon, and the first hackathon we did after that code red in 2023 was no surprise, AI focused. And every team in the company participated in this hack week, including our customer support team. And even back then, you think about how far the models have come, right, in over 2 years. But over 2 years ago, 4 folks from our customer support team who would not be considered technical in the conventional sense, they're not coders or what have you, they used ChatGPT to code a applet for Zendesk, which is our customer support tool. And why? Well, because they really understand the customer, they really understand the craft, and they know enough about those two things to know that one of the biggest prizes in customer support is making it easier and faster for a customer support rep to digest a ticket or a set of tickets and really understand the crux of the customer's problem so we can resolve it quickly and accurately. And in fact, that's the mission of the support team at Zapier. It's fast, accurate support, period. So you have Lauren Franklin, our customer support leader, who's done a really nice job of creating that clarity with the team. What is our mission? What does excellence look like? And the great thing is she has 2 metrics, right? So the mission of the team is fast, accurate support. There's a metric for fast, and that's called average ticket handle time. And there's a metric for accurate, which is related to CSAT. Like from the customer's perspective, how well did we solve the problem? And so it's just like really focused. It's really compact. And so with that in mind, without Lauren having to tell the team what to experiment with during this hack week, they code. The application for Zendesk at the time was called Zen GPT. It took a bunch of Zapier specific product and customer data as the knowledge base and uses it to summarize the tickets so that we can solve the customer's problem more quickly and more accurately. Today, that Hack Week project is now fully deployed across the whole customer support team. It's called Support Sidekick now, and it's one of the ways that the support team at Zapier has been able to reduce that average ticket handle time by almost half. And in doing so, maintain or even increase customer satisfaction with our response to their tickets.
So you mentioned hackathons, you mentioned hack weeks, and I want to dig into some of the tactics that you've used to drive up this AI literacy, AI fluency to that 89% mark that you had shared. What role do hackathons and hack weeks play? And what are some of the other tactics that Zapier has deployed in order to drive that metric up?
The hack weeks are an interesting place to start because part of our theory of the case on how to scale AI adoption in the organization was to integrate some of the learning and the building and the sharing of what we're building into as many of the organization's existing practices as possible, right? I mean, with AI, there is plenty that is new to like take in. And so like, instead of lighting up, in addition to just the newness of AI itself, in creating a bunch of additional practices in the organization to support it, we took more of an integrated approach. So the hack weeks are a great example where like AI is at the center, like really motivating folks to solve a problem with AI. So that's one. The others, when it comes to what we recognize or what we think good performance looks like, like most organizations, we have a core set of expectations, and we call them impact behaviors. And we've incorporated like the kind of building and experimenting with AI into those core expectations. Now, what matters the most when it comes to performance is productivity, it's output, right? For support, it's fast, accurate support, average ticket handle time, customer satisfaction. For recruiting, time to fill, candidate experience, offer to close rates. Like, in big picture, for our recruiting leadership, it's, how faithfully are we delivering with the organization on the hiring plan? So those are some examples. The AI fluency framework that we talked about earlier, that's an integrated approach, right? It's a new framework, but it's for the purposes of hiring. Now, two other things that really helped, which I think are like just outside of the integrated approach. One is just setting up a really clear place where folks can ask questions. It sounds so simple, right? Like, what do you mean? Like, I just ask a question. It's like, well, how? Right? These questions are big. They can be intimidating, and importantly, not only do you want to feel kind of confident in asking a question, but you also want to get actually back to the customer support example, a fast, accurate answer. And that doesn't happen in most organizations by accident. And it wasn't going to happen by accident at Zapier either. The good news is the solve for that is pretty straightforward. And here's what we did for what it's worth. We created a Slack channel, and that was the place. I said, this is the place any and every AI related question can go. You're not sure which model to use, ask it here. You're not sure whether this data can be used as a source, use it here. You're trying to figure out how to interpret this part of our AI use guidelines, same thing, single channel. So that was one piece. The other side of the coin is that we asked a few of our most skillful AI kind of experts to basically get in that channel and be accountable for helping folks get answers to their questions. And so you even think about like, gosh, what would it look like if we actually changed the job description of some of our most skillful AI folks so that, call it 20% of their job is helping others in their journey, right? Their AI fluency journey. And just like anything else, like what gets measured gets done. And I would be willing to bet that any organization that is really clear about repurposing some of their experts' time in service of helping everyone else come along in the journey, and is really clear about some of those like golden paths, single channel for Q&A, single forum for demos where people can get inspiration on use cases, that type of thing, that can be rocket fuel.
And if we were to have a histogram of the categories of questions that folks have asked since Code Red, what would you say are the top few categories of questions that folks are asking? In other words, what are some of the biggest challenges and question sets that are top of mind for folks at Zapier?
Mm-hmm. In the first year, so call it like spring of 23 to spring of 24, there's a lot of questions like, let's say like fundamental, like prompting, just like happy paths for getting certain types of results. Which model is best for what? And a lot of like, am I allowed to's? And part of that you solve for our onboarding experience includes a bunch of that information up front, such that everyone who joins the company from that point forward has clarity on some of those fundamentals. So we're using, to your point, by like histogram, like most common kind of themes or topics from the channel to inform what we should prioritize when we're onboarding folks into the company so that they just kind of have that context or that understanding from the get-go. Outside of some of those effective, kind of fundamental how-tos, we'll get questions about like, has someone solved for something before? So this is like, hey, I'm about to go like try to figure this out. And before I do, like, just in case, I missed something, like, is anyone else solve this or solve an adjacent problem? So maybe it's two different things, but the underlying kind of thing you would build in order to solve it is roughly the same. So we hear that too. And by the way, I love to see that because building with AI is a means, it's not an end. And so I like seeing folks like trying to figure out if someone has solved for an adjacent problem where they can pick up and maybe get 80% of the way there using someone else's craft.
That's one of the questions that comes top of mind for me when I'm thinking about managing AI transformation at a larger company is, let's say you empower everybody to be able to build AI workflows using the AI tools that they have access to. How do you prevent people from not necessarily stepping on each other's toes, but creating those redundancies? And maybe in the engineering world, you have this idea of spaghetti code, but almost this like spaghetti workflows situation where people maybe creating similar workflows using completely different tools, and there's nuances to each of those. Is that an issue at all? And if it is, I'm curious how Zapier is cleaning that up and creating a more efficient system for managing all of the different things that folks are building across the different teams?
This is an active question for Zapier. So the short answer is we haven't solved for that yet, but it's partly by design. I think when leaders are calling their teams into their version of an AI transformation or any transformation, we have to decide like how much like tops down control we want to exercise over the effort. And when it comes to Zapier's AI journey, there were a couple of things where we did feel like we need to provide that like tops down architecture. So the AI use guidelines would be a great example of that. The AI fluency framework would be a good example of that. The integration of the relevant AI knowledge or skill building into our new hire experience or onboarding, into our impact behaviors, right? Our core expectations of ourselves. 100% super helpful. And I think that's a place where like uniform or tops down clarity actually helps with speed and impact. When it comes to things like use cases and who's building what and why, what have you, gosh, we do not have a great solve for that yet. And, in some ways it's a problem of our own making, right? Because folks have really picked up these ways of working and are experimenting. It's like we're doing so many of the things that we aspired to when we wrote that code red over 2 years ago. So I would call it it's a good news problem, but it's still a problem we're interested in figuring out. We have very intentionally accepted degrees of redundancy and chaos, for lack of a better term, right? In service of speed, it really is like boosting our rate of learning effectively. So, the things that I think are going particularly well today are folks sharing their use cases, asking for help, like the degree of psychological safety that you can observe is really helpful. So I like to see that. But if you were to ask me today, Brandon, where is your library of like most everything anyone has built, with AI in your organization? And do you have like a taxonomy around it where you can search? By the way, the reason I'm getting specific is because like this is what we're working on right now. Where you can search by like problem to be solved or like business metric you're trying to influence, stage, like is it, prototype? Is it in production? Is it scaled and so on? Where can you read all the documentation, that kind of thing? We don't have an answer to that yet, but it's a question that we're really interested in solving.
Awesome. Watch this space. It's excited to see what comes out of Zapier in the next few months on that thread. And sort of along those lines, I'm curious about the ROI of AI workflows and the importance that you place on making sure that the workflows that folks are building are actually moving the needle. I'm sure it's not a secondary goal, but there is the benefit of improving AI literacy from building any AI workflow, whether it's improving ROI or not. You're getting more familiar with the tools that you're using, you're getting more used to getting hands-on. But at a certain point, it's also easy to spend a lot of time on architecting AI tools that may not necessarily move the needle, and maybe using AI in situations where there's a high level of human of the loop required, and you may end up in a place where the AI workflow and maintaining it is such a high level of effort that it may not necessarily be justified in continuing to spend time on that because it's still quite a manual process. Is that also a challenge that you've experienced during the AI transformation process? If so, how have you managed that challenge?
Haroon, I think you're right to talk about this notion of ROI because everything I'm about to say is still anchored on that like fundamental concept. When we think about ROI, there are a couple things that have been helpful. One is, are we measuring ROI on a use case by use case approach or using a more of a portfolio approach? For example, if I tell my recruiting team, or more accurately, if Tracy, our brilliant global head of talent, tells her recruiting team, that you should only build AI use cases if you kind of know up front they're going to have a really meaningful ROI. Like, don't build stuff that on a use case by use case basis is not going to have like a strong ROI. Well, folks are going to get pretty careful real fast about what they're building. And what we're seeing is it can be difficult to anticipate way up front, which of these, because these are ultimately, until they're validated, all of this is experimentation. And it's experimentation for several reasons. The most obvious one is from a technical perspective, we're not always sure or often sure up front whether AI can solve the problem. So now we're not even talking about cost. We're just talking about the numerator of ROI. Like, will it have material incremental impact on this metric compared to conventional levels of performance? And the answer up front from almost all of us is we're not sure yet. That's why we're experimenting with it. The second question we don't know up front is, well, how much does it cost to build and run? And does that make for an attractive kind of baseline ROI? It's very hard to know that up front. Depends how you build it, how much compute is involved, or how much upfront R&D was involved. And then thirdly, and this gets under discussed, Haroon, will people accept it? Right? There's this human element of like, let's say you can build an AI approach to interviewing. Actually, this is a lot of examples happening right now in the market, right? So it's like, we're gonna AI our interviews. No more humans doing interviews. And we can show that the AI is 20% more accurate at assessing these skills than a human. And turns out it's not that costly. Let's say all of that's been proven out. So like you've got that ROI. It's like incremental impact on skills assessment over relatively low cost. And you're like, we think, that's great. But again, the under discussed portion is, well, what's it going to take for all the folks involved in like being interviewed, for example, candidates to like, do they want to be interviewed that way? How will that influence our like the rate of applications from highly qualified candidates? Will our competitors keep a human in the loop to the extent that that's really valuable to the most promising candidates as a competitive advantage to Zapier? We were, by the way, we're not yet. And maybe won't for a long time. But anyway, if we take a human entirely out of the loop, are we giving away part of our game, to our talent competitors? And so there's that piece. It's more like anthropological. How does human behavior show up within this? That isn't always accounted for in an ROI calculation, but ought to be when we're figuring out what to build. And so not only do we not tell folks up front, like you have to prove the ROI is going to be positive on a specific experiment, where we can, like we take more of a portfolio approach. Right? Which is, here's a problem that we want to invest in solving. Here's the KPI that we are obsessed with. By the way, it should always be something the company already cares about. And we're going to run 3 experiments, right? There are like 3 ways, and then maybe one of them like is the winner. Maybe 2 of the 3 together have the impact that we intend. Maybe none of them work. And we go back to the drawing board and come up with 3 more. But taking more of a portfolio approach, but anchored on like specific problem spaces that where material improvements would make a big difference. Like they have a huge impact for the business and for customers.
So we surveyed our subscribers, and the 2 biggest challenges that they were facing internally at their organizations was 1, lack of integrations with data sources. And then number 2 is dealing with sensitive data from their users. I'm curious what the biggest challenges, other than the ones that you've already mentioned, have been for the Zapier organization in enabling this AI transformation journey, if you had to list off maybe 1 or 2?
Yep. Well, I would co-sign what you've heard from a lot of your stakeholders. And I think organizations are coming to this understanding that like our data is our differentiator. And so all the traditional like data and data science questions that our data team's already working on, like they just become more important. But the good news is none of those questions are new, right? It's like, what data do we need to be collecting and for what purposes as a source of competitive advantage for our organization and to better serve our customers? How do we store, synthesize, and sanitize that data? How do we connect data sources from disparate sources? What query layer, application layer do we put on top of that to actually answer questions and solve problems for the business? So the good news is those are timeless kind of data team questions, and they're just more important now is the short answer.
And then last question for you is, what has been the most surprising insight that you've derived during this journey?
Haroon, I would tell you that the thing that you're making me think about, it may not be the biggest surprise, but I think it's the thing that I am paying attention to the most, and it's giving me a lot of motivation and inspiration for the years ahead, is seeing how thoughtful, human-centered integration of AI into folks' jobs, like the business impact is amazing, right? It's really exciting to see that. The impact on the individuals themselves is really neat, right? We're talking about abstracting a lot of tedium out of typical ways of working such that humans do more of the things that humans do uniquely well. And like, I could have told you that 3 years ago, right? Cognitively, like intellectually, that might be the case, but actually seeing how that plays through in the people that I get to work through every day, like what it means to someone to know that they're being invested in this way and they're becoming truly elite in a future facing way, not to mention how it impacts or improves just like the everyday experience of doing the thing that they do best. It's incredible. And, I can't make any claims as to at the macro level how AI is going to influence the job market and the ins and outs of that. What I can see today are everyday examples of folks doing jobs that really matter to them in ways that I think are going to serve them really well in their careers.
It's incredible. It sounds like one of the byproducts of this journey has been the folks at Zapier are becoming more confident and less scared by all of the different fears that surround AI transformations because they're getting hands-on, because they're addressing the fear direct on and learning about where AI is maybe successful, maybe where it's not. We could still say we're at the very beginning stages of AI adoption across enterprise. So I would say most folks are still at that stage.
I would. I think maybe one of the biggest takeaways for me from the last few years has been getting really specific brings clarity, and clarity really helps with confidence. And the type of clarity or specificity that I think really serves all of us with a transformation like this is like staying grounded in our existing mission, stakeholders, whether that's students, customers, employees, whatever the case may be. Like, that's the thing that's not changing, right? Like, we all wake up to do a job for a specific reason and for specific people. And what AI is really about, at least as I think about it, is how can we take a huge step forward in how we do that together.
Brandon, thank you so much for your time. AutoSkills helps teams go from AI curious to AI ready. We run tailored workshops to uncover where AI has the biggest impact in your business, whether that's automating repetitive tasks, cutting hours out of your daily workflows, or choosing the right mix of tools and custom solutions. It's practical, hands-on, and built to get your team using AI for work that matters. Book your free 30-minute AI readiness audit at autoskills.ai.